Noah, a determined 9-year-old boy, stood at the back of a crowded room. He was a child who had always been taught to stand up for what was right, no matter the consequences. Today was supposed to be the happiest day in his father's life. His dad, Leo, was about to marry Delilah, a woman Noah had grown increasingly suspicious of. In the beginning, she had seemed warm and kind to Noah, but over time, her facade began to crack, revealing something much more troubling. A sense of unease had started to grow in Noah's heart, something he could no longer ignore. As the notes of the wedding march began to play and the doors slowly opened, all eyes turned toward Delilah, who entered, like a goddess, under the radiant sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. Guests whispered excitedly, eagerly anticipating a perfect ceremony. But for Noah, every step Delilah took felt like a countdown to impending disaster. In his anxious gaze, Noah knew he could no longer stay silent. Standing there amidst the joy of others, Noah made up his mind. This decision wouldn't just impact today, it would change the course of his entire family's life. His heart pounded as he thought about what he had to do. Stay and join Noah in this heartfelt story. If you've ever faced a tough decision and had to protect the ones you love, then this story is for you. If you think this story is good, comment with a 1. If you think it's great, comment with a 2. And don't forget to share your stories with us. Subscribe now so you don't miss our upcoming inspiring tales. The small chapel was filled with a sense of hopeful anticipation, with sunlight streaming through the colorful stained glass windows and casting vibrant hues across the pews. Family members, friends, and distant relatives had gathered, their hushed murmurs echoing off the stone walls as they awaited the union of Leo and Delilah. Noah stood at the back, his small form almost lost amidst the crowd of well-dressed guests, but his eyes were fixed solely on his father at the altar. He watched as his dad smiled nervously, smoothing down his crisp black tuxedo and adjusting his tie, clearly trying to maintain his composure. Leo's best man, his old friend Jake, clapped him on the back reassuringly. "You look great, buddy. You're about to have the happiest day of your life," Jake whispered, his smile warm and genuine. Leo returned the smile, his eyes reflecting both love and a hint of nervousness. It was supposed to be the happiest day, after all, and everything seemed to be going perfectly. But Noah saw what his father did not. He noticed the slight faltering in Delilah's eyes when she thought no one was watching, the way her face shifted when Leo spoke to her about family, especially about Noah. To everyone else, Delilah appeared flawless, radiant, charming, and completely enamored with Leo. Today she looked every bit the part of the beautiful bride, gliding down the aisle with grace, her dress flowing like water, and her veil fluttering gently with each step. Her smile was dazzling, but to Noah it felt forced, an illusion hiding something sinister beneath. Noah shifted his gaze to his father, who was now watching Delilah approach with eyes full of love. Leo's expression was so vulnerable, so filled with hope, that it made Noah's chest tighten. Leo didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to be fooled. Noah's small hands clenched into fists as he watched Delilah step closer, her footsteps seeming to echo in Noah's ears, like the ticking of a clock, counting down the seconds until something terrible happened. The officiant, an elderly man with a kind face, stood ready at the altar, his book open before him. As Delilah reached Leo's side, the crowd let out a collective sigh of admiration. Noah, however, felt his stomach twist. His dad took Delilah's hand, and she looked up at him with what seemed like adoration. But Noah had seen her true nature too many times when Leo wasn't around. He remembered the cold looks, the sharp words, the times she had spoken to him in a voice that was dripping with contempt. He had learned to fear the change in her eyes, the sudden switch from warmth to something much darker. The officiant began to speak, his words a soothing rhythm that flowed over the congregation, and for a moment Noah felt his resolve weaken. Could he really do this? Could he stop his dad from having what seemed like the perfect future? He knew what he was about to do would create chaos, would leave people shocked, and it might even mean his father would be angry with him. But Noah couldn't let it go on, not when he knew something was wrong. He had seen enough to know that Delilah wasn't who she pretended to be. As the ceremony proceeded, Noah's heart pounded louder, matching the rhythm of the officiant's words. His father stood there, happy and hopeful, while Delilah squeezed his hand gently, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the chapel. Noah's breath caught in his throat. Every detail seemed amplified: the rustle of Delilah's dress, the murmur of guests shifting in their seats, and the scent of fresh flowers that filled the room. He could feel the pressure building, the knowledge that he had to act, and soon. When the officiant spoke the traditional words, "If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace," the room fell into a profound silence. The moment seemed to stretch, each heartbeat echoing in Noah's ears like thunder. He could see his father's hopeful gaze, completely unaware of the danger that lurked right beside him. Noah took a deep breath, his small body trembling as he prepared himself. He knew this was his chance, maybe his only chance, to protect his dad from a mistake that would change their lives forever. He couldn't let fear hold him back, not when everything was at stake. The silence stretched further, the weight of the moment bearing down on his shoulders. Then, just as the officiant was about to continue, Noah's voice, small but firm, rang out across the room, cutting through the silence like a knife. "Wait." Heads turned, eyes widening in surprise as they searched for the source of the interruption. The murmurs began again, louder this time, confusion spreading among the guests. Leo's head snapped around, his eyes landing on his son, standing alone at the back of the room. "Noah?" he said, his voice filled with confusion and concern. Noah swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his ears. "You can't marry her, Dad. She's not who you think she is." His voice shook slightly, but he held his ground, his gaze fixed firmly on his father. The room erupted in whispers, shocked gasps echoing off the walls, as everyone turned their attention to the small boy standing at the back of the chapel. Delilah's face blanched, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at Noah, her composed facade cracking for just an instant before she forced a smile back onto her face. Leo's expression was a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Noah, what are you talking about?" he asked, his voice barely audible as he stared at his son, who stood with his fists clenched and his face flushed. Noah took a deep breath, knowing there was no turning back now. "She's lying to you, Dad. She's not the person you think she is. I've seen it. She's been mean to me when you're not around. She's planning something." His voice trembled slightly, but he refused to back down, even as the weight of every stare in the room bore down on him. Delilah let out a shaky laugh, her voice loud enough to reach the guests. "Oh, Noah, sweetie," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "I know this must be so hard for you, but you don't understand." "No," Noah shouted, his voice breaking as tears filled his eyes. "You're lying. You're not who you say you are." The guests looked from Noah to Delilah, uncertainty beginning to creep into their eyes. The room, which had been filled with joy only moments before, was now charged with tension, the weight of Noah's words hanging over them all. Leo looked between his son and his bride-to-be, his heart pounding in his chest. He could see the desperation in Noah's eyes, the fear that lay beneath his words. He turned to Delilah, whose smile was now brittle, her eyes filled with something that looked very much like panic. The officiant, unsure of how to proceed, glanced between the couple and the boy at the back of the room. "Perhaps we should take a moment," he began, but Leo shook his head, his eyes never leaving Delilah's face. "No," Leo said softly, his voice trembling slightly. "I need to hear what my son has to say." In the days following the first time Leo introduced Delilah to the family, Noah tried his best to be open-minded. That afternoon was beautiful. A warm family gathering with sunlight streaming through the windows, and Delilah was very friendly, saying all the right things about Noah. "Your son is so lovely, Leo. I'm very happy to meet him," she said in a gentle tone. Those words, coupled with the hopeful look in his father's eyes, made Noah feel like he could accept this change. At first, Noah thought that maybe this was an opportunity for his father to be happy again. He had lost his mother at a young age, and he understood how the loss had affected Leo. He hoped that with Delilah, their family might find a piece of happiness that had been missing. But it didn't take long for Noah to start noticing the first signs of something off. When Leo wasn't around, Delilah lost her gentle, friendly demeanor. Her eyes turned cold, and her smile disappeared. She often told Noah to be quiet when he tried to talk to her. "Noah, "Leave me alone, I'm busy," she would say, her tone lacking the warmth she showed in front of his father. One evening, when Leo was late getting home from work, Delilah was in charge of watching over Noah. He remembered that moment well when he eagerly talked about his school lessons. "Miss Delilah, I just learned about the solar system, I think." But Delilah interrupted him with an irritated look. "Be quiet, Noah. I don't have time for this." Her words made Noah step back, unsure of what to say next. During such evenings, Noah deeply felt that she wasn't the person his father thought she was. He remembered the sparkle in his father's eyes when talking about their future with Delilah, and he didn't want to destroy that happiness. But every time Delilah looked at him with disdain, every time she told him to be quiet or showed irritation, Noah felt himself being pushed further away from the family he used to know. Noah tried to talk to his father about it once. "Dad, what do you think about Miss Delilah?" he asked one evening while they were having dinner together. Leo smiled brightly. "You know, Noah, she's wonderful. I think she'll be a great mother to you." Noah remained silent, wanting to tell his father that Delilah wasn't what he thought she was, but he couldn't. His words caught in his throat, and his fear of taking away the rare joy his father had found kept him quiet. Delilah continued to play the role of the perfect partner whenever Leo was around, but Noah became increasingly isolated. He had tried to smile when Delilah acted friendly in front of Leo, but it felt like he was living in a house full of false walls. He knew that Delilah wasn't sincere with him, and more importantly, that she wasn't someone his father should trust. As the wedding day drew closer, Noah's doubts grew stronger. Delilah seemed to stop caring about hiding her dislike for him. She no longer bothered to be friendly in front of Leo and began ordering Noah around as if he were a burden. "Clear the table, Noah. Do it now," she said coldly, and sometimes even warned him with a threatening glare. The feeling of isolation began to suffocate Noah. He missed the evenings when it was just him and his dad playing games, watching movies, and telling stories to each other. Now, everything revolved around Delilah, and her presence felt like a dark cloud looming over their home. Noah knew he had to do something, but how could he tell his father without hurting him? And would his father even believe him? Those questions kept swirling in Noah's mind as he tried to figure out a solution. One thing he knew for certain: Delilah wasn't who she pretended to be, and Noah couldn't just stand by and watch his father fall into the arms of someone like her. As time passed, Delilah's behavior only grew worse when Leo wasn't around. What once were small, passive-aggressive comments had become more overt and mean-spirited. The way she looked at Noah, the way her lips curled in disapproval whenever he entered the room, made Noah's stomach twist in knots. He could see that Delilah wasn't just indifferent to him, she resented his presence entirely. One evening, when Leo had to work late again, Delilah's true nature came to the forefront. She was sitting in the living room, staring at her phone when Noah accidentally knocked over a glass of water on the coffee table. The glass shattered on the floor, and the water splashed across the carpet. Startled, Noah immediately scrambled to pick up the pieces. But Delilah was already on her feet, her eyes blazing with fury. "What are you doing?" she snapped, her voice icy and sharp. Noah looked up at her, terrified, as she grabbed his arm roughly and yanked him away from the broken glass. "You're always making a mess. You can't do anything right, can you?" she hissed, her nails digging into his skin. Noah winced, tears welling up in his eyes. He tried to apologize, but the words wouldn't come out. The fear and pain in his chest made it impossible to speak. Delilah's face twisted with disgust as she let go of him. "Clean it up, and don't let me catch you breaking anything else," she said coldly. Noah nodded frantically, trying to blink away the tears. He grabbed a towel from the kitchen and knelt to wipe the water off the carpet, his hands trembling. For the rest of the night, Noah stayed in his room, not daring to come out until he heard his father's car pulling into the driveway. When Leo finally walked through the door, Delilah was all smiles again, greeting him with a kiss and asking how his day had been. Noah watched from the top of the stairs, rubbing his arm where Delilah had grabbed him, feeling more alone than ever. He wanted to tell his dad so badly. He wanted to tell Leo everything, how Delilah treated him when they were alone, the way she made him feel like he was unwanted in his own home. But the fear of not being believed, the fear of making his father unhappy, kept him silent. One Saturday afternoon, about a month before the wedding, something happened that Noah couldn't shake. Leo had gone out to run some errands, leaving Noah and Delilah alone in the house. Noah was sitting on the living room floor, quietly watching cartoons, when Delilah walked in, her face set in a scowl. "Turn that off," she said, gesturing to the television. "It's too loud, and I'm trying to work." Noah quickly reached for the remote, fumbling in his haste. As he grabbed it, his elbow knocked over a glass of juice, spilling it all over the coffee table and dripping onto the carpet. Panic set in immediately. Noah jumped up to get napkins, his heart racing. Before he could even move, Delilah was already there, her fingers gripping his shoulder painfully. "Look what you've done," she hissed, her voice dripping with contempt. "You clumsy, careless child. Do you have any idea how much trouble you are?" Noah's eyes filled with tears as he stammered out an apology. I'm sorry, Miss Delilah. I didn't mean to. I'll clean it up." Delilah's eyes narrowed, her face inches from his. "You better," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And listen to me, Noah. If you breathe a word of this to your father, you'll be very, very sorry. Do you understand me?" Noah nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt trapped in his own home, where he should have felt safest. He watched Delilah leave the room, her face calm once again as if nothing had happened. Slowly, Noah wiped up the spilled juice, the weight of Delilah's words pressing heavily on him. That night, as Leo sat beside Noah's bed, reading him a story, Noah stared at the ceiling, barely hearing the words. He wanted to say something. He wanted to shout the truth. But when Leo smiled down at him, ruffling his hair, Noah just forced a smile back. "Good night, buddy," Leo said, turning off the lamp. "Good night, Dad," Noah whispered, his voice cracking slightly. He watched his father leave the room, closing the door gently behind him, and once again Noah was left in the darkness, with only his fears and the weight of Delilah's threat keeping him company. With each passing day, the weight of Delilah's threats and her increasingly hostile behavior toward him became harder for Noah to bear. He knew he needed to speak up, but every time he thought about it, fear silenced him. It wasn't just fear of Delilah, it was also the fear of what his father might do. Would his dad believe him, or would he brush it off, thinking Noah was just a confused kid struggling with change? One night, after another long, intense day, Noah made up his mind. He couldn't keep living in fear. He waited until after dinner, until Delilah had gone to take a long bath, leaving Leo alone in his study. Noah took a deep breath, his small hand clenching and unclenching the fabric of his shirt as he knocked timidly on the door. "Come in, buddy," Leo's voice called warmly from inside. Noah opened the door slowly, peeking his head into the room. Leo was sitting at his desk, going over paperwork, but he set it aside as soon as he saw his son. He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "What's up, kiddo?" Noah hesitated, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He opened his mouth to speak, but found that his voice was stuck. Leo noticed his son's unease and patted the chair next to his desk. "Come here, Noah. You can tell me anything, you know that?" Taking a deep breath, Noah crossed the room and sat down, his legs dangling from the chair. He looked at his dad, trying to find the right words. "Dad." "It's about Miss Delilah," he finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. Leo's expression softened, and he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "What about Delilah, son?" he asked gently. Noah twisted the hem of his shirt, his eyes dropping to the floor. I don't think she likes me very much," he said, his voice shaking. She's different when you're not around." Leo's brows furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, Noah?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "Delilah's always been nice to you, hasn't she?" Noah shook his head, tears beginning to well up in his eyes. "No, Dad. She's mean to me when you're not here. She says things. She makes me feel like I'm not wanted." He sniffled, trying to keep his voice steady. She grabbed me the other day because I spilled something. She scares me, Dad." For a moment, there was silence in the room. Leo looked at his son, his face a mixture of disbelief and worry. He rubbed his hand across his forehead, a sigh escaping his lips. "Noah, buddy, I know this is a big change for both of us. It's okay to feel a little unsure, but maybe you're just misunderstanding Delilah. She cares about us, and she's trying her best." Noah's heart sank at his father's words. He could see the doubt in Leo's eyes, the reluctance to believe that someone he loved might not be who they seemed. "But Dad, Noah started, his voice cracking, but Leo shook his head softly. "No buts, Noah," Leo said, his tone still gentle but firm. "Delilah is going to be part of our family, and I need you to give her a chance. I know it's hard, but sometimes people take time to get used to each other." He reached out, ruffling Noah's hair affectionately. "Everything is going to be okay, buddy. I promise." Noah nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. He forced a smile, even though his heart felt heavy with disappointment. "Okay, Dad," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Leo smiled back at him, unaware of the turmoil in his son's heart. "That's my boy," he said, pulling Noah into a warm hug. "I love you, kiddo. We're going to be just fine." Noah hugged his father back, his small arms wrapping around Leo tightly. He closed his eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. He wanted to believe his dad. He wanted to believe that everything would be okay. But deep down, he knew that Delilah was hiding something, and he didn't know how to make his father see it. The days after Noah's conversation with his father were filled with uneasy tension. Despite his best efforts to get Leo to see the truth about Delilah, Noah knew that his dad was still blind to her real nature. It was as if a wall stood between them, a wall that Delilah had carefully constructed. Noah became quieter, more withdrawn, unable to shake the feeling of helplessness that had taken root in his chest. One late night, as Noah lay awake in bed, he heard voices coming from downstairs. He glanced at the clock, 11:42 p.m. The low murmurs caught his attention. At this hour, it could only be Delilah. Curiosity piqued, and sensing something was off, Noah slipped out of bed and crept down the hallway, his bare feet soundless on the cool wooden floor. He stopped just before the stairs, crouching down and peeking through the railings. In the dim light spilling from the living room, he could see Delilah pacing back and forth, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. She sounded frustrated, her voice a harsh whisper that carried a cold edge. "Mark, you need to listen to me," Delilah said, her tone sharp. Noah felt his stomach tighten at the name. He'd never heard her mention a Mark before. He stayed still, his breath held as he listened. "No, we can't rush this. Everything has to be perfect. The wedding is in 2 weeks, and once that's done, we move on to phase 2. Yes, the insurance policy. Leo doesn't suspect a thing." Noah's eyes widened, his heart hammering in his chest. "Insurance policy? Phase 2? He strained to hear more, clenching the railing so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Just stick to the plan," Delilah continued, her voice dripping with frustration. "Once we get the money, we'll be set for life. No more scams, no more close calls. This is our ticket out of here." Noah's heart skipped a beat. Fear washing over him. Scams? Money? Was she planning to hurt his dad? He swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. He knew now, without a shadow of a doubt, that Delilah was dangerous. She was hiding something far worse than just not liking him. She was planning to harm Leo. Delilah's voice grew even colder. "That kid Noah is the only problem. He's too smart for his own good. I can tell he's suspicious, but don't worry, I'll handle him. Leo's too blinded by love to ever believe a word against me." Noah's eyes welled with tears, and he bit down on his lip to keep from making a sound. He had always felt that Delilah didn't want him around, but hearing her talk about him like this, with such open contempt, cut deeper than he ever imagined. She saw him as a threat, and she was determined to get rid of both him and his father. "2 weeks after the wedding, we'll make our move," she hissed, her tone final. David won't know what hit him. Noah's heart felt like it was going to burst out of his chest. He needed to do something. He needed to protect his father, but what could he do? He was just a kid, and Delilah was ruthless. As he backed away from the stairs, he accidentally knocked into a picture frame hanging on the wall, causing it to shift and make a soft thud. Delilah immediately went silent. Noah froze, fear surging through him. He pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath, hoping she wouldn't come upstairs. He heard her footsteps pause, and for a moment the only sound in the house was the ticking of the clock in the hallway. After what felt like an eternity, Delilah spoke again, her voice low and dangerous. "I've got to go, Mark. I'll call you later." Noah heard her end the call, and the next thing he knew, her footsteps were moving towards the stairs. He turned and fled, running as silently as he could back to his room. He slipped inside, shutting the door softly behind him before diving under the covers, his heart pounding in his ears. He lay there, trembling, as he heard Delilah's footsteps pause outside his door. Noah squeezed his eyes shut, praying she wouldn't come in. After a few moments, he heard her move away, her footsteps receding down the hall. He let out a shaky breath, tears streaming down his face as the full weight of what he had just overheard sank in. Delilah was planning to hurt his dad. She wanted the money from his insurance policy, and she had a partner, someone named Mark, helping her with this awful plan. Noah knew he couldn't stay silent anymore. He had to find a way to protect Leo, no matter how scared he was. Bookmark. The next day, Noah woke up with a single thought. He had to gather evidence against Delilah. He couldn't just tell his father again. Leo wouldn't believe him without proof. Noah needed something solid, something undeniable that would make his dad see the real Delilah. As soon as he got out of bed, Noah felt the weight of the task ahead of him. He was just a kid, but he knew he had to do whatever it took to protect his father. During breakfast, he watched Delilah as she smiled at Leo, serving him pancakes and laughing at his jokes. The same sweetness, the same act that she put on every time his dad was around. Noah's resolve hardened as he saw Delilah casting him a quick, cold glance when Leo wasn't looking. He knew he had to be careful. He needed to find the right moment, the right opportunity to act without raising suspicion. His chance came that very afternoon. Leo had to go out for a meeting, leaving Noah and Delilah alone in the house. It was rare for Delilah to be careless, but today she seemed distracted, her mind occupied by whatever plan she and Mark were putting together. Noah waited until she was in the shower before he slipped into Delilah's room. His heart pounded as he stepped inside, the air thick with the smell of her perfume. He made his way to her bedside table, pulling open the drawers as quietly as he could. Inside, he found nothing but magazines, hand cream and jewelry, nothing out of the ordinary. His gaze shifted to her desk where her laptop sat. Noah hesitated. He knew it would be risky, but the laptop had to hold something important. He quickly walked over and opened it. As expected, it was password protected. Noah took a deep breath. He remembered what he had overheard Delilah saying to Mark about things needing to be perfect. She was meticulous, but sometimes meticulous people had predictable habits. Noah tried her birthday. Nothing. He tried Leo's birthday. Still nothing. Then he remembered the sticky note he had once seen Delilah use as a bookmark. He went over to her bookshelf, scanning the spines until he found the book he remembered. He opened it, and there, tucked between the pages, was the sticky note. On it were a few random-looking letters and numbers. Noah's heart skipped a beat. It was worth a try. He rushed back to the laptop, carefully typing in the code. The screen flashed, and then it unlocked. Noah felt a surge of adrenaline as the desktop appeared. He scanned through the files, his eyes darting across folder names. Most were innocent enough until he spotted one labeled Insurance. His heart raced as he clicked on it, opening a series of documents. The words life insurance policy and accidental death jumped out at him. He scrolled through the documents, his eyes widening as he realized the enormity of Delilah's plan. It was all here. The policy details, the amount of money she would receive, and notes about changes made just after their engagement. Noah quickly took out his phone, snapping pictures of the documents. He knew he couldn't stay in the room for long. He had to be fast. He scrolled through more files, coming across a folder titled Mark. He opened it, and there were photos of Delilah with a man he had never seen before. They looked close, almost like a couple. Some of the pictures were dated just a few months back. There were also emails between Delilah and Mark, discussing their plan, referring to Leo as the target, and talking about timelines and payout dates. Noah's hands were shaking as he took pictures of everything he could. He felt a mix of fear and anger building inside him. Fear for his father's safety and anger at Delilah for what she was planning. He knew he couldn't let her get away with this. Just as Noah was about to close the laptop, he heard the water in the bathroom turn off. Panic set in. He quickly closed all the windows on the laptop, shut it down, and put it back exactly as he had found it. He glanced around the room, making sure everything was in its place before slipping out and running back to his own room. He jumped onto his bed, his heart pounding as he tried to steady his breathing. A few moments later, he heard Delilah's footsteps approaching. She paused outside his door, and Noah held his breath, praying she wouldn't come in. After a long, tense moment, her footsteps moved away, and Noah let out a sigh of relief. He clutched his phone tightly, knowing that what he had found could finally make his father see the truth. The rest of the day was a blur. Noah avoided Delilah as much as he could, the weight of his secret pressing heavily on him. He needed to find the right time to show his father what he had discovered, but he also needed to make sure Delilah wouldn't find out. He knew she was dangerous, and if she even suspected that he had gone through her things, there was no telling what she might do. That night, as they sat down for dinner, Noah could barely eat. Delilah was her usual charming self, laughing with Leo, asking him about his day, and pretending to care about what Noah had done in school. Noah forced a smile, nodding when necessary, but inside he was counting down the minutes until he could get away from the table. After dinner, Leo suggested they watch a movie together. Noah saw his chance. "Dad, can we talk first?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. Leo looked at him, a bit surprised. "Of course, buddy. What's on your mind?" Noah glanced at Delilah, who was busy clearing the dishes, her back turned to them. "It's kind of private," he added, giving his father a meaningful look. Leo nodded, sensing the seriousness in Noah's tone. "Sure thing, let's go to my study," he said, getting up and leading Noah away from the living room. Once they were in the study, Leo closed the door behind them. He looked at Noah with concern. "What's going on, Noah? You look worried." Noah took a deep breath, pulling out his phone. His hands were trembling as he opened the photos he had taken earlier. "Dad, I need you to look at these," he said, handing the phone to Leo. Leo took the phone, his expression turning from curiosity to confusion as he scrolled through the pictures. The insurance policy, the emails, the photos of Delilah with Mark, each image seemed to drain the color from Leo's face. He looked up at Noah, his eyes wide with shock. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Noah's eyes filled with tears. "I found them on Delilah's laptop, Dad. I heard her talking on the phone last night. She's planning something terrible. She wants the insurance money. She's planning to hurt you." Leo stared at his son, his mind reeling. He looked back at the photos, the reality of what he was seeing slowly sinking in. "Noah, are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice cracking. He wanted to believe it wasn't true, that there had to be some mistake, but the evidence was right there in front of him. Noah nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I'm sure, Dad. I heard her. She was talking to someone named Mark. She said you wouldn't know what hit you. Please, Dad, you have to believe me." Leo's heart broke as he looked at his son, at the fear and desperation in his eyes. He pulled Noah into a tight hug, his tears threatening to fall. "I believe you, Noah," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner. I promise you I'm going to fix this. I won't let her hurt us." Noah clung to his father, a sense of relief washing over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he wasn't alone. His dad finally knew the truth, and together they would figure out what to do next. Whatever it took, they would protect each other and make sure Delilah's plans would never come to pass. The day of the wedding arrived, and the tension in the house was palpable. Noah felt like he was living in a dream where everything was happening too fast and out of his control. He watched as Leo got ready, adjusting his tie and smiling into the mirror, a look of happiness and hope in his eyes. It broke Noah's heart to know that his father was still blissfully unaware of the danger that lurked nearby. But not for long, Noah thought to himself. Today, everything was going to change. The wedding was held in a quaint little chapel at the edge of town, surrounded by towering oaks and decorated with flowers in delicate hues of white and lavender. Guests filled the pews, their excited whispers echoing in the sacred space. As Noah walked down the aisle as the ring-bearer, he could see the smiles of relatives and friends, their eyes shining with joy. But Noah could hardly return their smiles. His gaze drifted to Delilah, who was standing at the back of the church, her white dress flowing elegantly around her as she prepared to make her entrance. Noah knew that he couldn't let this wedding happen. He had to stop it before it was too late. The evidence he had shown Leo last night had shaken his father to the core, but Leo had insisted they keep their calm until they were sure of what to do. He didn't want to create a scene unless there was no other choice. But Noah had felt the urgency. It was now or never. As the wedding march began to play, the guests rose to their feet, turning towards Delilah as she began to walk down the aisle. Leo stood at the altar, his eyes filled with adoration as he watched her approach. Noah's heart pounded in his chest, the words of the officiant fading into the background. His eyes never left Delilah, and he could feel the anxiety building inside him. He clutched the ring pillow in his hands, his fingers tightening around it until his knuckles turned white. "Do you, Leo, take Delilah to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the officiant asked, his voice resonating in the stillness of the chapel. Noah looked at his father, who was gazing at Delilah with such love, and then at Delilah, whose eyes glimmered with something cold and calculating beneath her smile. It was now or never. Noah swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his ears. "Wait!" Noah's voice rang out, high and clear, cutting through the silence like a knife. A collective gasp swept through the church, and all eyes turned to the small figure standing at the front. Leo's eyes widened in shock as he turned to look at his son. Delilah froze, her smile faltering for just a moment before she quickly recovered, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Noah, what is it?" Leo asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and concern. Noah took a deep breath, stepping forward, his small voice trembling as he spoke. "Dad, you can't marry her. She's not who you think she is. She's been lying to you." The room fell into stunned silence. The officiant paused, looking unsure of how to proceed, while murmurs began to ripple through the guests. Delilah's eyes flashed, her face going pale. She stepped towards Noah, her voice sickly sweet. "Noah, sweetheart, this isn't the time for jokes. Come here, darling." "No," Noah shouted, stepping back. He looked up at his father, tears brimming in his eyes. "Dad, she wants to hurt you. I heard her talking about it. She just wants the money, the insurance policy. She's been planning to hurt you after the wedding." A heavy silence followed, the air thick with disbelief. Leo's face went ashen, his mouth slightly open as he tried to process what his son was saying. He looked at Delilah, whose expression had shifted from shock to something darker, a mix of fury and desperation. "That's ridiculous," Delilah snapped, her voice losing its calm veneer. "He's just a child, Leo. He doesn't understand what he's saying." She turned to the guests, her smile now strained. "I'm so sorry, everyone. He's just feeling overwhelmed. It's a big day for all of us." Leo shook his head, taking a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "No, Delilah, let him speak." His voice was low, but there was an edge to it, an edge that Noah recognized as his father's protectiveness finally rising to the surface. Noah took another deep breath, his voice cracking as he continued. "She's lying to you, Dad. I saw it on her laptop. She's working with a man named Mark. They're planning to take everything from you. Please, you have to believe me." Delilah's expression turned icy, her hands clenching at her sides. "Leo, you can't seriously believe this," she hissed, her voice dropping so that only Leo and Noah could hear. "You know how much I love you, how much I care about this family." But Leo's eyes were now filled with doubt, his gaze shifting between Noah and Delilah. He could see the fear in Noah's eyes, the genuine terror that his son was experiencing. Slowly, Leo turned to face Delilah fully. "Is this true, Delilah?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Is any of this true?" For a split second, something shifted in Delilah's face, an emotion that looked like pure rage before she masked it with a look of wounded innocence. "Leo, I would never. He's making it up. He's confused." Leo's jaw clenched, and he reached out, taking Noah's small hand in his. The chapel was utterly silent now, all eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. "Noah doesn't lie," Leo said, his voice barely above a whisper but filled with conviction. "And if there's even a chance that what he's saying is true, I need to know." Delilah's composure finally cracked. Her eyes darkened, and she took a step back, her voice trembling with anger. "You're going to believe him? Over me? After everything?" Leo nodded, his face stern. "If my son says you're a danger to us, then I have to listen." He paused, his eyes hardening as he spoke. "We're done, Delilah. This wedding is off." A murmur of shock went through the church, and Delilah's face twisted in fury. Without warning, she turned and bolted down the aisle, her dress flowing behind her like a ghostly shadow. Gasps filled the air as the guests watched her push through the chapel doors and disappear outside. Leo knelt beside Noah, pulling him into his arms and holding him tightly. "I'm so proud of you, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You did the right thing." Noah buried his face in his father's shoulder, finally letting the tears flow. He was trembling, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from relief. The weight of the past few weeks seemed to lift off his chest, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt safe. Suddenly, the church doors burst open, and 2 police officers entered, their faces set in determination. "Mr. Leo?" one of them called out, approaching the front. "We received a call about an incident here." Leo stood up, keeping a protective arm around Noah. "Yes, officer. The woman who just ran out, Delilah. She's been planning something dangerous. My son overheard her." The officers exchanged a glance and nodded. "We need you both to come down to the station to give a statement," the officer said, his tone calm but urgent. "And we'll need a description of Delilah." Leo nodded, looking down at Noah, who wiped his tears and nodded in return. "Okay," Leo said, his voice steady. "We'll do whatever we need to." As they walked out of the chapel, Noah clung to his father's hand. The guests were still murmuring, whispering among themselves, their shocked expressions following the pair as they moved. Jack, Leo's best man, approached them, his face a mix of confusion and concern. "Leo, is everything all right?" Leo gave Jack a weary smile, squeezing Noah's hand. "It will be, Jack. Thanks to Noah, it will be." Jack nodded, patting Noah gently on the shoulder. "You're a brave kid, Noah. You did well." Noah looked up at Jack, managing a small smile, though his eyes were still wet with tears. "Thank you," he whispered. As they walked towards the police car, Noah looked up at the sky, the sun setting in brilliant hues of orange and pink. He felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that the worst was finally behind them. His father was safe and they were together. And that was all that mattered. Leo glanced down at his son, his eyes filled with pride and love. "We're gonna get through this, buddy. You and me, no matter what." Noah nodded, squeezing his father's hand tighter. "I know, Dad. I know." Together, they climbed into the police car, ready to face whatever came next. Together. Delilah's sudden flight from the chapel left a wave of stunned silence in her wake. Leo knelt beside Noah, wrapping his arms tightly around his son, feeling the relief washing over both of them. The weight of the truth had finally been lifted, but there was still the matter of making sure Delilah could no longer hurt them. As the guests began to murmur among themselves, the door of the chapel burst open, and 2 police officers hurried inside, their presence immediately commanding attention. One of the officers, a tall man with a stern face, spoke first, scanning the room. "Mr. Leo? We received a call about an incident here." Leo stood, keeping a protective arm around Noah. "Yes, officer. The woman who just ran out, Delilah. She's been planning something dangerous. My son overheard her talking about harming me." His voice trembled, but there was a newfound strength in it, a determination to see this through to the end. The officer nodded, his expression serious but understanding. "We need to take your statements, both of you. And we'll need a description of Delilah. Do you know where she might have gone?" Leo shook his head, glancing towards the open doors where Delilah had disappeared moments ago. "I don't know. She ran out so suddenly, I didn't see where she went." The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, a shorter woman with a kind face. "All right, we'll put out a notice and alert patrol units in the area. We need to make sure she's found and doesn't have the chance to cause any harm." He looked down at Noah, giving him a reassuring nod. "You did a very brave thing, young man." Noah managed a small smile, though his hands still trembled slightly. I wanted to protect my dad," he said quietly. Leo looked down at his son, his heart swelling with pride and emotion. He knelt down to Noah's level, pulling him into a tight hug. "And you did, buddy. You did more than I could ever ask for." Noah clung to his father, the tension slowly easing from his body. For so long he had felt alone with the burden of Delilah's deceit, but now, with his father by his side and the police ready to help, he finally felt a sense of security. As the officers spoke with Leo, gathering details about what had happened, the guests in the chapel were abuzz with conversation. Whispers and questions rippled through the crowd. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. Jack, Leo's best man, stepped forward, concern etched across his face. "Leo, is there anything I can do?" he asked, his eyes flicking to Noah, who was still clinging tightly to his father. Leo stood nodding at Jack, his expression weary. "Jack, could you help make sure everyone leaves safely? And maybe let them know that, well, there won't be a wedding today." His voice wavered as he spoke, but there was a sense of resolution in it. Jack nodded, patting Leo on the shoulder. "Of course. Don't worry about this. I'll take care of it. You just focus on Noah and yourself." Leo offered a tired smile. "Thanks, Jack. I don't know what I'd do without you." Jack turned towards the guests, raising his voice slightly to address them. "Everyone, if I could have your attention, please. Given the circumstances, we need to ask everyone to head home for now. Leo appreciates your support, but he needs some time with his family." The guests nodded in understanding, slowly rising from their seats and filing out of the chapel. Some paused to offer words of support to Leo. Others simply nodded at Noah with looks of sympathy and admiration. Noah watched them leave, his heart pounding in his chest, still trying to absorb everything that had happened. Once the chapel was mostly empty, one of the officers, Officer Johnson, turned to Leo. "We need to head down to the station now, Mr. Leo. It's important that we get a formal statement about everything that's happened today." He glanced at Noah, offering him a kind smile. "You too, Noah. You're a big part of this," Leo nodded, glancing at his son. "Are you okay to come with us, Noah?" he asked softly. Noah took a deep breath and nodded. "I want to help, Dad. I want to make sure she can't hurt us anymore." Leo's eyes misted over and he gave Noah's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "All right, buddy. Let's do this together." The ride to the police station was a blur. Noah sat close to Leo in the back of the police car, the comforting weight of his father's arm around his shoulders. The streets of the town passed by outside the window, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Everything looked strangely normal, in stark contrast to the whirlwind of emotions inside Noah's mind. When they arrived at the station, they were taken to a small, quiet room where Officer Johnson and his partner, Officer Rivera, sat down with them. Officer Rivera took out a notepad, her demeanor calm and patient. "All right, let's start from the beginning. Noah, can you tell us what you overheard Delilah saying?" Noah looked at his father for reassurance, and Leo gave him an encouraging nod. Noah took a deep breath, his voice steady despite the fear that still lingered. He recounted everything, how he had overheard Delilah's late-night conversations, her talk about the insurance policy, the mentions of a man named Mark, and the details he had found on her laptop. The officers listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes, their expressions growing graver as Noah continued. When Noah finished, Officer Johnson looked at Leo. "And you saw these documents, Mr. Leo?" Leo nodded, his jaw tight. "Yes, Noah showed me the pictures he took on his phone. I couldn't believe it at first, but everything was there. The policy, the emails, the photos of her with that man. She was planning this for months." Officer Rivera exchanged a glance with her partner before turning back to Leo and Noah. "You did the right thing by coming forward. We're going to do everything we can to locate Delilah and make sure she can't follow through with any of her plans." She paused, her eyes softening as she looked at Noah. "You're very brave, Noah. Not many people, let alone kids, would have had the courage to do what you did today." Noah blushed slightly, looking down at his hands. "I just didn't want her to hurt my dad," he said softly. Leo pulled Noah closer, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "You saved me, Noah. You really did." Officer Johnson stood, offering a firm nod. "We're going to file this report, and we'll keep you both updated on the search for Delilah. In the meantime, we suggest you stay somewhere safe, maybe with a friend or family member, until we can ensure she's no longer a threat." Leo nodded, the exhaustion evident in his eyes. "We'll figure something out. Thank you, officers, for everything." As they left the station, Leo held Noah's hand tightly. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Jack was waiting for them by his car, his face lighting up in relief as he saw them approach. "Everything okay?" Jack asked, his voice full of concern. Leo nodded, giving Jack a tired smile. "Yeah, we've done what we needed to do. Now, we just need to lay low for a while." Jack opened the car door for them, patting Noah on the back. "You did great, kid. I'm proud of you." Noah climbed into the car, looking at his dad as Leo settled in beside him. He felt a sense of calm start to settle in, something that had been missing for far too long. They had faced the truth, and now, together, they were ready to face whatever came next. As they drove away from the station, Noah looked out the window, the town passing by, the lights flickering on as the evening settled in. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but with his dad by his side, he was ready for it. They had each other. And that was all that mattered. Bookmark. The truth may set you free, but sometimes it brings a whirlwind of emotions that are far from easy to process. The police station was dimly lit, the harsh fluorescent lights casting an uncomfortable glow over the otherwise sterile environment. Leo and Noah sat in a small room with pale green walls that had seen better days, the lingering smell of stale coffee in the air. They had just finished recounting their story to Officers Johnson and Rivera, and now the weight of it all seemed to settle heavily on their shoulders. Noah sat close to his father, his small hands still resting in Leo's, as if grounding both of them to reality. For the first time since the chaos had begun, Leo had a moment to look at his son properly, to see the exhaustion etched on his young face. He realized how much strength it must have taken Noah to carry the burden of Delilah's secrets all on his own. And the realization left a dull ache in his heart. "Are you okay, buddy?" Leo asked quietly, his voice strained but full of tenderness. Noah looked up, his eyes slightly red from the tension and fatigue. He managed a small smile, nodding. "Yeah, Dad, I'm just glad you believe me." He took a deep breath, as though finally allowing himself to let go of the fear that had haunted him for weeks. "I was so scared you wouldn't." Leo's heart broke at his son's words. He tightened his hold on Noah's hand, his eyes welling up with tears. "I'm sorry, Noah. I should have listened to you sooner. I was so caught up in everything, I didn't see what was right in front of me." His voice cracked, and he pulled Noah into a hug, resting his chin on his son's head. "You're the bravest person I know." Officer Rivera entered the room, interrupting their moment with a soft knock on the door. She offered a kind smile. "Mr. Leo, Noah, we've recorded your statements. We're going to be monitoring Delilah's movements. We're also putting out alerts to ensure she won't get far. We know this must be incredibly difficult for you both." Leo nodded, trying to regain his composure. "Thank you, officer. We just want to make sure we're safe." Rivera's expression softened as she nodded in agreement. "We'll do everything we can. In the meantime, if there's a place you can stay that's not home, that might be best for tonight." She looked at Noah and smiled gently. "You're a brave young man, Noah. Not many kids would have the courage to stand up like you did today." Noah blushed slightly, looking down at his sneakers. "I just didn't want my dad to get hurt," he mumbled. Officer Rivera gave a reassuring nod before leaving the room. Leo looked at Noah, his eyes reflecting the exhaustion of the day. "How about we stay with Uncle Jack tonight, huh?" "I think we could both use a little break." Noah smiled at the suggestion, nodding. "Yeah, that sounds good. Jack's always fun." Leo smiled, though it was tired and strained. He took a deep breath, and then led Noah out of the small room. The station was still bustling with activity. Officers answering phones, filing reports, and the murmur of conversations filling the air. Despite the movement around them, it felt like a small pocket of quiet had enveloped Leo and Noah, as if they were disconnected from the world for just a moment. Jack was waiting for them in the lobby, his face lighting up in relief as soon as he saw them. He rushed over, enveloping Leo in a tight hug. "Man, I can't even begin to imagine what that was like," Jack said, his voice a mixture of empathy and concern. Leo patted Jack on the back and then pulled away, a weary smile on his face. "Yeah, it's been a lot. But Noah, he saved me, Jack. He saved us both." Jack looked down at Noah, his eyes softening. He knelt down in front of him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're a hero. You know that, kiddo?" Jack's voice was gentle, but full of admiration. "You did something incredibly brave today. I'm proud of you." Noah gave a small smile, shrugging a little. "I just wanted to protect Dad." Jack nodded and stood up, turning to Leo. "Come on, let's get you two out of here. I've got the guest room ready, and I even picked up some of that pizza Noah likes." He winked at Noah, and the boy's eyes lit up at the mention of pizza. "Stuffed crust?" Noah asked, a bit of excitement returning to his tired voice. Jack chuckled. You bet. Only the best for our hero. As they walked out of the station, the cool night air washed over them, a welcome contrast to the heavy atmosphere inside. The sky was deepening into a dark blue, stars beginning to peek through, and Noah found himself staring up at them as they crossed the parking lot. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to think of Delilah, wondering where she was now, if she was scared, if she regretted anything. He wasn't sure if she did, and maybe it didn't matter anymore. Hey, Leo's voice broke through Noah's thoughts as he gave his son's shoulder a squeeze. We're gonna be okay, you know that? Noah looked up at his dad, meeting his eyes. The fear and tension of the day were still there, but so was something else. Hope. He nodded, smiling faintly. Yeah, Dad, I know. They reached Jack's car and Noah climbed into the back seat, leaning his head against the window as Jack and Leo got in. As they pulled away from the police station, Noah watched the world outside pass by, familiar streets that somehow seemed different now, as if everything had shifted, just slightly. He felt tired, but it wasn't the kind of tiredness that would weigh him down forever. It was the kind of tiredness that promised rest and renewal, the kind that made him realize they had made it through something big. And they were still here. Jack glanced back at Noah through the rearview mirror, a warm smile on his face. You did good today, buddy. Now, how about we go home and eat that pizza? Noah smiled, his eyes already starting to droop. Sounds perfect, he whispered, finally allowing himself to relax. As Jack drove them away from the station, Leo turned to watch his son. Noah's eyes were closed now, his breathing steady, and Leo felt a rush of gratitude that was almost overwhelming. Despite everything, despite the fear and the betrayal, they were still here, still together. And as they headed towards Jack's house, Leo knew one thing for certain. They would face whatever came next, together, as a family. The warmth of Jack's home enveloped Leo and Noah as they stepped inside, finally feeling a hint of safety after the long, chaotic day. Jack led them to the cozy living room, where soft yellow light washed over the room, and a comforting aroma of freshly baked pizza wafted through the air. Noah smiled faintly as Jack gestured for him to sit, and the boy sank into the plush couch, his tired eyes brightening a little at the sight of the food. Leo, however, could not shake the heavy weight in his chest. He stood there for a moment, watching his son as Jack joked about all the toppings they had gotten. Noah's laugh was small but genuine, and it pulled at Leo's heart. He should have seen what was happening sooner. He should have been more aware and more protective. The realization that Noah had to step up because he, Leo, had been too blinded by love, struck him hard. He felt his chest tighten with guilt. Jack glanced at Leo, sensing something was wrong, and gave him an understanding nod. Hey, why don't I get us some drinks? He said, heading to the kitchen. Leo watched Jack leave and then turned to Noah, who was watching him quietly. Dad, you okay? Noah asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant. Leo took a deep breath and walked over, sitting next to his son on the couch. He took Noah's hand in his, squeezing it gently as he looked into his eyes. Noah, I need to tell you something. He paused, his voice trembling slightly. I'm so sorry. I should have seen what was happening. I should have listened to you sooner. Noah blinked, confusion and worry crossing his face. But Dad, it's okay. You didn't know. Delilah, she was really good at lying. You were happy, and I didn't want to mess that up. Leo shook his head, tears beginning to blur his vision. No, Noah, it wasn't your job to protect me. It was my job to protect you, and I didn't. I let her into our lives without really knowing her, and it almost cost us everything. His voice cracked, and he looked down, his hands trembling slightly as they held on to Noah's. Noah shifted closer, wrapping his small arms around his father. But you did protect me, Dad. You believed me when it mattered most, and you're here now. He hugged Leo tighter, his voice muffled against his father's shoulder. That's all that matters to me. Leo felt his tears fall then, slipping down his cheeks as he wrapped his arms around his son, holding him tightly. For a moment, they sat there together, the world around them fading into a gentle hum. It was as if the weight of all the fear and tension was slowly melting away in the warmth of their embrace. Jack returned with drinks, pausing at the doorway when he saw them. He quietly set the drinks down on the table, not wanting to disturb the moment. Leo looked up, catching Jack's eye, and mouthed a silent thank you. Jack simply nodded, his own eyes soft with emotion. Noah eventually pulled away, wiping his face with his sleeve and giving Leo a small smile. Besides, you always tell me we're a team, right? You and me against the world? Leo chuckled through his tears, nodding. Yeah, buddy, you and me against the world. He ruffled Noah's hair gently, feeling a sense of peace starting to settle in his heart. The guilt was still there, but it was tempered by the strength and love in Noah's eyes. It was a reminder that, despite everything that had happened, they still had each other. And that was enough. Jack cleared his throat, trying to lighten the atmosphere. All right, heroes, who's ready for some pizza? He lifted the box lid, revealing the cheesy, stuffed crust masterpiece. Noah's face lit up, and he nodded eagerly. I am, he said, reaching for a slice. Jack handed one to Leo as well, giving him a supportive pat on the shoulder as he did. Leo looked at Jack, then back at Noah, who was now happily munching on his slice. He felt the warmth of his family surrounding him, the family that had stuck by him through the worst of times. A sense of hope began to bloom in his chest, fragile but real. They had been through darkness, but here they were, still together, still fighting for each other. Thanks, Jack, Leo said softly, his voice full of gratitude. Jack just smiled, sitting down across from them. No problem, man. We're all in this together. He raised his glass of soda in a toast, to family and to being there for each other, no matter what. Noah lifted his glass, grinning. To family. Leo smiled, lifting his own glass. To family. They clinked their glasses together, the sound ringing softly through the room like a promise of new beginnings, of resilience, and of never letting go of what truly mattered. And as they sat there, sharing pizza and stories in the comfort of Jack's home, Leo felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: contentment. It wasn't the perfect ending he had once imagined, but it was theirs, and it was real. And maybe, just maybe, that was better than perfect. It was early Saturday morning when Leo and Noah packed up their old camping gear into Jack's truck, excitement mixed with a hint of nervousness on both their faces. This trip was meant to be more than just a getaway. It was a chance for both of them to heal, to reconnect after everything they had endured. Jack insisted on taking them to a remote campsite, one of his favorites, nestled in the woods a few hours from the city. For Leo, it was a much-needed escape from the recent past, and for Noah, it was a chance to experience something new and adventurous. The drive was filled with laughter, stories, and the kind of easy chatter that had been absent in their lives for too long. Jack kept the mood light, telling jokes and pointing out various sights along the way, while Noah sat in the back seat, his eyes wide as he watched the trees and fields rush past. Leo glanced back at his son from time to time, his heart swelling with relief at seeing the boys smiling, his worries momentarily forgotten. When they finally arrived, the campsite was everything Jack had promised: quiet, scenic, and perfect for a fresh start. Towering trees surrounded a clearing where they set up their tents, the morning sun filtering through the branches to cast dappled patterns on the ground. The sound of a nearby creek bubbled softly, providing a calming soundtrack as they worked together to set up their camp. "Noah, pass me those steaks, would you?" Jack called out, holding up a piece of the tent. Noah grabbed the steaks, running over eagerly to help. His excitement was infectious, and Leo couldn't help but smile as he watched his son work with Jack, their laughter echoing across the clearing. Once the tents were up and a small fire pit had been prepared, the three of them sat down on a couple of logs they had dragged over, catching their breath. Jack opened a cooler, pulling out some sandwiches and handing them around. "Nothing like a classic PB&J to start off a camping adventure," he grinned, and Noah took his with a smile, immediately taking a big bite. "Thanks, Uncle Jack," Noah said between bites, his voice full of enthusiasm. "This is awesome. I've never been camping before." Leo's heart softened at the sight of his son's genuine joy. He took a bite of his sandwich, feeling some of the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. For so long, their lives had been overshadowed by fear and deceit, but out here, with the fresh air and the laughter of loved ones, it felt like they could finally breathe again. The day passed in a blur of simple pleasures. They hiked through the woods, Jack leading the way with Leo and Noah close behind. Noah's curiosity was boundless. He asked about every plant and animal they encountered, his excitement making each discovery feel like an adventure. Jack, ever the patient teacher, explained everything he knew, while Leo watched with a content smile, feeling pride swell at Noah's thirst for knowledge. In the afternoon, they made their way to the creek Jack had mentioned earlier. The water was crystal clear, and Noah's eyes lit up as he spotted fish darting beneath the surface. "Can we try to catch some, Dad?" he asked, looking up at Leo with hopeful eyes. Leo chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. "Of course, buddy, let's give it a shot." They fashioned simple fishing lines from sticks and twine that Jack had brought along, and soon the three of them were crouched by the creek, their lines dipping into the cool water. There was a sense of peace in the simplicity of it all, the gentle flow of the creek, the quiet rustle of leaves in the breeze, the occasional splash of a fish as it swam past. For Leo, it was a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind. He watched Noah, who was focused intently on his line, his face a mask of concentration, and felt a swell of gratitude. His son had faced so much, but here he was, still so full of life and wonder. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jack gathered firewood, and soon they had a roaring campfire going. They sat around it, the warmth of the flames warding off the evening chill. Jack brought out marshmallows, and Noah's eyes widened in delight. "S'mores?" he asked excitedly, and Jack nodded with a grin. "You can't go camping without making s'mores," Jack said, handing Noah a stick and a marshmallow. Leo watched as his son carefully toasted his marshmallow, the light of the fire reflecting in his eyes. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental, like a piece of their lives had clicked back into place. When the stars came out, Leo found himself lying on his back next to Noah, staring up at the night sky. The blanket of stars above them was breathtaking, and Noah pointed out constellations with the enthusiasm only a child could muster. "Look, Dad, that one looks like a bear," he said, his voice full of awe. Leo smiled, nodding. "You're right, buddy, it really does." He turned his head slightly, looking at Noah. "You know, I'm really proud of you." Noah looked over, his expression curious. "Why, Dad?" "For everything," Leo replied softly. "For being brave, for protecting me, for being you. I know things haven't been easy, but you've handled it better than I ever could have asked." Noah was quiet for a moment, then he moved closer, resting his head against Leo's shoulder. "I was scared, Dad, but I knew we'd be okay, as long as we were together." Leo swallowed the lump in his throat, wrapping an arm around Noah and pulling him closer. "You're right, Noah. As long as we have each other, we'll be okay." Jack, sitting by the fire, glanced over at them, a smile tugging at his lips as he watched the two. He raised his mug of hot cocoa in a silent toast to them, then took a sip, savoring the warmth. There was something about this moment, the crackling fire, the stars above, the love between father and son, that felt timeless. The night went on with stories shared around the fire, laughter that echoed through the woods, and the kind of warmth that only family could bring. Leo found himself smiling more than he had in a long time, his heart lighter with every laugh that escaped Noah's lips. Eventually, as the fire died down, they made their way into their tents. Noah, exhausted from the day, was asleep almost as soon as he lay down, his face peaceful in the dim light of the tent. Leo watched him for a moment, his heart swelling with love and pride. He leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to his son's forehead. "Good night, buddy," he whispered. Stepping out of the tent, Leo found Jack sitting by the last embers of the fire, staring into the glowing coals. Jack looked up as Leo approached, patting the log next to him. Leo sat down, and for a moment neither of them spoke, content in the silence of the night. "You did good today, Leo," Jack finally said, his voice soft. "Noah's lucky to have you." Leo shook his head, a small smile on his lips. "I'm the lucky one, Jack. He's the best thing that ever happened to me." Jack nodded, his gaze returning to the embers. "Well, you're both pretty lucky then, and I'm glad you've got each other." Leo looked up at the sky, the stars twinkling above. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a sense of peace, a sense that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. They still had a long road ahead, but they were taking it one step at a time together. "Thanks, Jack," Leo said quietly, "for everything." Jack smiled, clapping Leo on the back. "Anytime, my friend, anytime." As they sat there, watching the last of the fire fade away, Leo knew that this was the start of something new, a chapter filled with healing, love, and the promise of brighter days ahead. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Leo's phone rang, the unexpected caller ID showing Officer Rivera's name. Leo's stomach twisted as he answered, the air in his chest tightening with anxious anticipation. On the other end, Officer Rivera's voice was steady, but carried a note of gravity that immediately made Leo's heart sink. "Mr. Leo, I'm afraid we have some difficult news," she began. "Delilah. She has been found." There was a pause, a breath of silence so heavy it seemed to stretch on forever. "She was found in a motel room outside of the city. I'm so sorry to inform you that she took her own life." The words hung in the air, echoing in Leo's mind. He stood still, the world around him seemingly pausing as if everything in his life had frozen at that moment. The once clear autumn sky outside his window felt suffocating, and the warm light seemed to lose its vibrancy. He found himself struggling to breathe, his heart pounding heavily. "She left a note," Officer Rivera continued, her voice softening. It expressed remorse for everything she had done. It seemed she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. Rivera gave Leo time to absorb the information, the silence on the line filled with a kind of solemn understanding. Leo leaned against the wall, sliding down to sit on the floor. His mind was a jumble of emotions, shock, confusion, and a wave of sorrow that took him by surprise. Delilah was gone. The woman who had come into his life, who had deceived him, who had threatened everything he held dear, was now dead. He had imagined her being caught and facing justice, but never this. Noah entered the room, his small footsteps approaching cautiously as he noticed his father's demeanor. "Dad?" he called, his voice gentle but laced with worry. Leo looked up at his son, his eyes betraying the chaos of emotions within him. He patted the floor beside him, and Noah quickly sat down, leaning into his father's side. "It's about Delilah," Leo said after a moment, his voice hoarse. "The police found her. She's gone, Noah." He swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. "She took her own life." Noah's eyes widened, and he looked down at his hands, silent for a long moment. Leo could feel the tension in his son's small frame, the confusion and sadness emanating from him. Noah finally whispered, "Why, Dad?" Leo sighed deeply, his arm wrapping around Noah's shoulders and pulling him closer. "I think she felt guilty for everything she did to us, buddy. Sometimes people make choices that they can't live with, and they feel like there's no other way out." His voice broke slightly as he spoke. He had to tell Noah the truth, but he also wanted to protect him from the harsher realities of life. "Does that mean she was sorry?" Noah asked, his voice almost too quiet to hear. Leo took a deep breath, considering his words carefully. "Maybe, Noah. The officer said she left a note. She said she was sorry for what she had done. I think she must have realized that what she did was wrong, but it doesn't change what happened or what she did to us." Noah nodded, resting his head against his father's chest. Leo could feel the boy's heartbeat, steady but uncertain. The complexity of the situation weighed heavily on them both. Leo felt an odd mixture of grief and relief, a strange sense of closure mingled with the lingering pain of betrayal. Delilah's death brought an end to the threat she had posed, but it also left behind an empty void of questions and unresolved emotions. Leo thought of the woman he had once believed in, the dreams he had once allowed himself to have about a future with her. He thought of how those dreams had turned into nightmares. The realization that someone he had loved could fall so far, so irreparably, left an ache that was hard to describe. Noah's voice broke through his thoughts, trembling slightly. I feel sad for her, Dad, but I also feel scared, and maybe a little angry." He paused, looking up at Leo. "Is that wrong?" Leo shook his head slowly, pressing his lips together before speaking. "No, buddy, it's not wrong. It's okay to feel all of those things. What she did to us was wrong, and it's normal to feel angry about that. And it's also okay to feel sad for her, because, in the end, she was a person who made terrible choices and paid a terrible price." Noah nodded, his eyes still clouded with confusion, but there was a glimmer of understanding there as well. Leo held his son tightly, a deep sense of protection swelling within him. Whatever they faced from now on, they would face it together. and Leo knew they would grow stronger from it. Delilah's chapter had ended, but their story was still being written, and he vowed that every page from here on out would be filled with love, honesty, and the warmth of family. Jack arrived later that evening, his usual jovial expression replaced by one of somber concern. He had heard the news and came to be with them, bringing takeout and a sense of calm with him. Leo was grateful. He didn't want to be alone with his thoughts, not tonight. They sat together in the living room, sharing a quiet meal, the television on in the background providing a soft murmur of normalcy. Jack glanced at Noah, offering a gentle smile. "Hey kiddo, how are you holding up?" Noah looked at Jack, then at his father, before giving a small shrug. "I'm okay, I think. Just a lot to think about." Jack nodded, understanding. He ruffled Noah's hair gently. "That's okay, Noah. You're a tough kid, you know that? You've been through a lot, and you're still here, stronger than ever." Leo watched as Noah gave Jack a small, grateful smile. In that moment, he realized that though Delilah had cast a shadow over their lives, they had emerged from it. They had each other, and they had friends who cared about them. Delilah's end was tragic, but it didn't define them. They were moving forward, step by step, with hope still intact. That night, as Noah finally drifted off to sleep, Leo sat by his bedside, watching the steady rise and fall of his son's chest. He reached out, brushing a lock of hair from Noah's forehead. "We're going to be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. And for the first time in a long while, he believed it. The weeks that followed Delilah's death were filled with a whirlwind of emotions, but slowly, Leo and Noah began to piece their lives back together. They attended counseling sessions together, each session bringing a mix of vulnerability, sadness, and ultimately, relief. The counselor was a kind, patient woman named Grace, who encouraged both of them to express their feelings openly. For Noah, it was a place to explore the tangled emotions of anger, fear, and sadness he still felt toward Delilah. For Leo, it was about learning to forgive himself for what had happened. One afternoon, during a particularly challenging session, Grace asked Noah, "What is something you miss about life before Delilah?" Noah thought for a moment, his eyes distant as he tried to remember the time before everything had changed. "I miss how simple things were," he said finally. "I miss when it was just me and Dad. We used to have these movie nights. It was just us, with popcorn, and no one else making things complicated." His voice wavered slightly, and he looked at his father, who gave him an encouraging nod. Leo smiled softly, a pang of nostalgia hitting him. "Yeah, I miss that too," he admitted. "And you know what? We can still do that, buddy. We can make our own new normal, just the two of us." Grace nodded, smiling at both of them. "That sounds like a wonderful idea. Creating new traditions can be a powerful way to heal." She encouraged them to think of ways to rebuild the connection they had lost and to focus on the things that brought them joy. That evening, Leo and Noah decided to restart their movie nights. They picked out an old favorite, a silly superhero movie that they both loved, and settled in on the couch, a bowl of buttery popcorn between them. As the opening credits rolled, Leo glanced at Noah, who was already grinning at the screen, his eyes sparkling with excitement. The movie played, filling the room with laughter and light, and for the first time in a long while, Leo felt at ease. He felt a sense of contentment wash over him, a realization that despite everything, despite the darkness they had faced, they still had moments like this, moments that were simple, full of love, and theirs to cherish. The next few weeks were full of these small, deliberate efforts to reconnect. They cooked together in the evenings, trying out new recipes that often ended in laughter when things didn't quite go as planned. They took long walks in the park, throwing a frisbee back and forth and talking about anything that came to mind. Slowly, the tension that had been ever-present began to fade, replaced by a new kind of peace. One day, Noah brought home a stray kitten he had found near his school. The tiny creature was scrawny and a little scared, but it purred when Noah held it close. "Can we keep it, Dad?" Noah asked, his eyes wide with hope. Leo looked at the small kitten, and then at his son. He could see the gentleness in Noah's eyes, the desire to care for something small and vulnerable. It reminded him of the love and resilience that had kept them going through the toughest times. Leo smiled and nodded. "Yeah, buddy, I think we can keep her. What should we name her?" Noah beamed, glancing down at the kitten, which had started to settle comfortably in his lap. "How about Hope?" he said softly. His voice filled with meaning. Leo's heart swelled at the name, and he nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Hope sounds perfect." From that day on, Hope became a part of their small family. The kitten seemed to sense the fragility in their home and filled it with warmth, her playful antics bringing laughter back to their household. Leo would often find Noah playing with Hope in the living room, their laughter echoing through the house in a way that made it feel alive again. The counseling sessions continued, but they became less intense and more reflective. Grace helped them see how far they had come, how they had faced the shadows of their past and emerged stronger. One afternoon she asked them to each write a letter to themselves, a way to mark the end of this chapter and celebrate the progress they had made. Noah wrote about his fears and how proud he was of himself for standing up even when he was scared. He wrote about missing his mom and how he had felt betrayed by Delilah, but also about how happy he was to have his dad by his side. He ended his letter by promising himself to always speak up when something felt wrong and to always protect the ones he loved. Leo's letter was different. He wrote about his regrets, the guilt that had weighed him down for so long. He wrote about how he had let his guard down and how it had nearly cost him everything. But then he wrote about the strength he found in his son, about how proud he was of Noah's courage. He promised himself to never let fear hold him back from protecting those he loved and to cherish every small moment they had together. They shared their letters with Grace, who listened intently, her eyes filled with understanding. When they were done, she smiled. "You both have come so far. Healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about finding a way to move forward, stronger and more connected. And that's exactly what you two have done." As they left the session that day, Leo felt a sense of closure. It wasn't that the pain was gone, it never truly would be, but it no longer defined them. It was just a part of their story, one that they had faced together and had come through to the other side. That evening, they sat together in the backyard, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Hope chased a moth across the lawn, her tiny paws swatting at the air, while Leo and Noah leaned back on the porch steps, enjoying the coolness of the evening. "Hey, Dad?" Noah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Yeah, buddy?" Leo turned to look at his son, the fading sunlight casting a golden glow across his face. "Do you think we're going to be okay?" Noah's voice was steady, but there was still a hint of vulnerability there. Leo smiled, wrapping his arm around his son's shoulders and pulling him close. "Yeah, Noah, I really do. We're going to be just fine." And as the last of the sunlight disappeared, leaving the sky painted with the first hints of starlight, Leo knew that they had come a long way. They still had a journey ahead, but they were walking it together, one step at a time, with hope firmly in their hearts. On the 1-year anniversary of the day that had changed their lives forever, Leo and Noah decided to honor it in a different way. Instead of dwelling on the past pain and the turmoil that Delilah had brought into their world, they chose to celebrate their bond and how far they had come since then. They packed a picnic and drove out to a beautiful state park, just like they had during their camping trip months before. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of autumn leaves as they hiked through a winding path that led to a small lake. Noah ran ahead, laughing as he jumped over rocks and dodged branches. Leo watched his son, his heart swelling with pride. The boy running in front of him was no longer the fragile, frightened child from a year ago. Noah had grown stronger, more confident, and so much braver. When they reached the lake, they found a quiet spot along the shore, laying out their blanket and unpacking the food they had brought. They shared sandwiches and fresh apples, the sound of the gentle waves lapping at the shore creating a comforting backdrop. The tranquility of the setting seemed to mirror their own healing journey, a reminder of how far they had come and the strength they had found in each other. After lunch, they sat together by the lake, throwing pebbles into the water and watching the ripples spread outwards. Noah looked up at his father, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Dad, I think we should do this every year," he said, "like as a tradition, to remember where we were and how far we've come. Leo smiled, his eyes misting at the thought. I think that's a wonderful idea, Noah. A day just for us to remember what really matters. Noah nodded, looking back at the lake. Yeah, and to remind ourselves that no matter what happens, we always have each other. Leo reached over, wrapping an arm around his son's shoulders and pulling him close. Always, he whispered. They sat there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. For Leo, this was more than just a new tradition. It was a promise to never let go of what truly mattered, a promise to always cherish the bond they shared. Together, they watched as the sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving behind a sense of peace that they both held on to as they made their way back home. The car ride home was filled with a comforting silence, both Leo and Noah lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived back at their house, they decided to bake a batch of cookies, a spontaneous decision that led to flour scattered across the kitchen and peals of laughter echoing through the room. The cookies ended up slightly burnt, but neither of them minded. It wasn't about perfection. It was about the memories they were creating together. Later that night, as they sat at the kitchen table enjoying their slightly charred cookies with glasses of milk, Leo looked across the table at his son, his heart full. Noah, he said softly, catching the boy's attention, I want you to know how proud I am of you. This past year, you've shown me what true courage looks like. You stood up when things were at their worst, and because of that, we're here today. Noah smiled, a blush rising in his cheeks. I was just doing what I thought was right, Dad. I just wanted us to be okay. Leo nodded, his voice thick with emotion. And that's exactly what makes you so brave, buddy. You chose to speak up, even when it was hard, and I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. We're a team, you and me. Noah's eyes glistened as he nodded, the bond between them feeling stronger than ever. Always, Dad. They clinked their glasses together in a small toast, sealing their promise to each other. It was a simple moment, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through. An acknowledgement of the struggles and the pain, but also the love that had gotten them through it all. As they finished their cookies and headed upstairs, Leo paused at Noah's bedroom door, watching as his son crawled into bed, Hope the kitten curling up beside him. Good night, buddy, Leo said, his voice filled with warmth. Good night, Dad, Noah replied, his eyes already starting to close. Leo turned off the light, leaving the door slightly ajar, and stood there for a moment, feeling a sense of contentment wash over him. This was their life now, a life filled with small moments of love, new traditions, and an unbreakable bond. They had faced the darkness, and now they were stepping forward into the light together, stronger than ever before. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more uplifting and inspiring tales. And let us know in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Noah's shoes? How do you define courage and family? We'd love to hear your thoughts.